live.
Good morning, Baltimore, for this, the second edition of Money, Power, and Politics. I do apologize because it's a little bit overcast today, and I don't do well on days when it's overcast for any number of reasons, mostly because of age and bodily deterioration. But we'll get through it one way or the other this morning, uh, along with my co host, Hassan Barnes, who again is not with us in person, but is certainly here in the spirit, and he is in fact visible. He is having a medical procedure today, which I will not inform you of because it is quite intrusive, if you know what I mean. All right,
Hello,
let's
hello.
move.
Before you go forward, good morning to everyone out there. I'm here at my home office. Disregard anything that Bob says, but it's good to see you guys today, however virtual I may be.
Okay, you may recall that at the beginning or near the end of our last show, we talked about the federal Department of Education and the fact, and we inquired, we questioned how the dismantling of that department or the dismantling of certain programs that were previously administered by the department would affect, what effect that would have on public education in the state of Maryland generally, or in any of the 23 subdivisions within the state, including in particular Baltimore City. Well, we've done a little bit of research here, and let me add that if any of you desire to fact check the things that we say, our desire is to provide information, understanding that the quote facts may be different depending upon what source you rely upon, but please trust me that when we recite facts, they are based upon research that we've done. They're not, to the maximum extent possible, they are bereft of our personal opinions, except where we state that this is our opinion or the result of our analysis of whatever the issue may be. We try to present the truth. We don't believe that Kellyanne Conway's statement that there are alternative truths. We don't believe Rudy Giuliani's statement that the truth isn't always true. We do believe that there is a truth, and we think that that would be based upon fact and not simply our desire for a particular outcome or a particular set of events. Having said all of that, let me get back to the education issue, and I'm going to invite Hassan, since this was a matter of particular concern to him, uh, to start us off with a discussion about that.
Well, I'll say this: as we know, President Trump is in his second term. During his first term in office, he sought to roll back the education department. Then he wanted approximately $9 billion in cuts from Department of Education. And he wanted to eliminate programs like teacher training and after-school programs. Now, Congress ultimately declined his request, but we should have known early on that his plan was to change how we see education in this country. And really, it's unfortunate. One of the things this country has is world-class education. Now, I'm from Baltimore, and some people would say, "Ho, ho, ho! The schools in Baltimore City aren't the best schools." That's true, but we have a situation in Maryland where you have Baltimore City on one hand that may not have the best schools, but you have Montgomery County on the other hand that have great schools. Across the country, we have a good system of education, from lower level education, K through 12, to college, which is probably one of the benefits we have in this country over other countries. Even though we're so broad and wide ranging, our systems are designed to make sure young people have a certain level of information, whether it's reading ability, writing ability, math ability. We may fall short, but that's not the goal, and the law should be towards making sure that our young people have basic information. Um, President Trump has said, even from his first term, that he likes the voucher program. He likes the school choice. It's complicated. School choice suggests to the community that you can actually choose where you want to go. That's not what that really means, right? So you can have school choice if there's choices to choose from. If you're in urban communities, it may not be enough choices for family to make an actual choice in the matter. We have charter schools, we have private schools. One of the things we have now is the president thinks people can take money and just go to private school. Send your kids to private schools. That ignores the fact that private schools are very selective. Anyone in the the East Coast knows, if you want your kid to go to a good private school, it's a process, it's a testing requirement, it's a personality requirement. As an attorney, I recall a couple of years ago, we had a case where my client, her husband, they were financially well off, and their son couldn't get to any private schools. He went out to several, he did interviews, and not one of the schools wanted them. Public schools don't have a choice taking students, private schools do. So when you say choice, it's not a real choice if you have one, limited means, or two, your child needs more support than private school can handle. So in that backdrop, when President Trump came in, he wanted to dismantle the Department of Education. He wants to give the money to the states and let them figure things out on their own. That sounds good in theory, but the reason we had the federal government involved in schools in the first place because we had disparities in education across the country. If you were Alabama, you had different school and different resources than you were in Maine, than you were in California, than you were in Florida. And that's the hard part. People don't always look back to the historical context as to why we needed the federal administration to get involved. And we talked, Bob, you and I, about what your thoughts were on why schools were publicized, why schools were public, and why the federal government was involved in the first place. What was your perspective?
Well, part of it was, as you said, the to fulfill the constitutional commitment that everyone would have the same opportunity to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And education plays a great role in that, a huge role in that. And so it was to eliminate the disparity between the public school system in Mississippi, for example, which at one time had the lowest state level contribution to per capita to the public education system there, compared to states like Maryland and other places, which had a significantly higher per capita contribution. So, in other words, the kids in the federal government's goal was to see that the kids in Mississippi had the same opportunity, or roughly the equivalent same opportunity as the kids in Maryland or any place else to achieve a good education. And no matter what alternatives that might be created to the public education system, the fact of the matter remains, I believe at least, that the majority of children in this country will be educated in the free public education system. And so the pushback that there has been to vouchers and to some cases to charter schools is that we have to be mindful and careful that we don't misalign valuable resources and take away resources that the public schools need because that's where the great masses of kids will be educated or will be provided the opportunity to become educated if that opportunity is to be provided at all. But there are also disputes even at the federal level about who was going to get how much and what ought to be taught, really. And that's a dispute. That's an issue that's now very much prevalent in the local school systems. That, because education is as much enculturation as it is education. In other words, the education is a lot more. The public education system does a lot more than just teach you that 2 + 2 is 4, or how to properly conjugate verbs, or the difference between an adjective and an adverb. There's a lot more. There's a lot of culture involved in public education. For example, the public school system, at least when I was there, we were taught that Christopher Columbus discovered America. Well, I was probably 17, 18 years old before I learned in reality that Christopher Columbus never set foot in America or even in the North American continent. We were taught to celebrate Columbus Day as a national holiday, but what we weren't taught was that the reason that Columbus Day was established for the Italian community was because of the killing of, I think, 11 Italians that occurred somewhere in the Louisiana area, I think in New Orleans. And as an appeasement to that community, Columbus Day was created. So those things are taught to us. The shot heard around the world. Well, so a lot of what it means to be an American as such is taught in the public education system. And what it means to be an American means different things to different people. We are not an homogenous society. We're made up of people who voluntarily immigrated here and a whole bunch of folk like us who were brought here involuntarily. And the question of our humanity, in fact, I think still exists. So that's a long-winded way of responding to your question. I hope that our viewers were able to decipher.
Let me ask you this:
Yeah.
the American people have come out, and there's been various polls that has been against the idea of gender ideology. They've been against the idea of young men who may transition to be young women, competing in sports against biological girls, and that's been one of the push that Trump has had for why the Department of Education should be eliminated. That, in addition to critical race theory, those two competing ideas have been what he used what his base to say, hey, the Department of Education has gone too far. They're pushing issues that shouldn't be in school, and that's where his support has come from. What do you say to those two ideas that maybe the other side, the liberals, were a bit aggressive in their pushing, whether critical race theory or gender ideology?
Well, it sounds like you're trying to push all of my buttons this morning. You use a lot
Not
of
at all.
loaded
Just ask the
terms.
question. I'm
You're
asking the
using a
question.
lot of loaded terms like liberals and the conservatives, and you know how I feel about and woke and all of that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is, in my opinion, at least, the Trump administration has embarked upon a wholesale attack against anything black. Okay, and he's done it under the guise of eliminating because of DEI, because the presumption is that there's always a white person that's most qualified for the position. And so any position that you have that's not occupied by a white person, whoever has it must have been a DEI hire, whether it's an Air Force air controller, or air traffic controller, or the leader of the Library of Congress. The people, or the firing of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or the firing of the primary health officer within the military, or even the elimination of, albeit supposedly temporarily, of Jackie Robinson from the history of the U.S. military. It's a wholesale attack against black folk. And I don't know what this concept of people of color is. I thought white was a color. That's what I was taught in school. So I don't know what anybody means when they use that term. I'm going to assume that it means non-white. And for the sake of clarity and ease of reference, I'm going to assume that non-white means black, and whatever shade that may be, brown, yellow, or anything else. Black is a cultural phenomenon. It's a cultural concept. It's not just a color concept. It's a cultural concept. And basically, it refers to anybody who's non-white. That's why we lumped in this group called people of color. I know I'm not particularly, that's not exactly responsive to your question, but I told you to stop pushing my buttons like that, and you won't get me going off on tangents. Go ahead.
So for our viewers, as we can see, Bob has been a little bit far afield. So critical race theory is a legal principle. Actually, we've heard about it in the media. It's a legal ideal that we should be sometimes circumspect of institutions, in that they may have been created and or policies have been in place that have been biased either against one race or for another race. Ideally, biased for whites and against blacks, has been the history in the country. The reality is, I'm of the impression that most things they're calling critical race theory is not, in fact, critical race theory. They're lumping in anything about black culture to be critical race theory. So you talked about Harriet Tubman. That's not critical race theory. That's American history. We talking about Brown v. Board. That's not critical race theory. That's American history. We talking about slavery. Again, that's not critical race theory. That's history. There's no theory there to be biased one way or the other. It's a factual thing that happened in this country, and it's our history, whether you black or white. It's all our history. But I do think people, citizenry, have seen that, and they feel, or they've been told through media, that critical race theory somehow makes whites feel guilty for being white. When I'm not sure it should. I mean, for me, if you're saying there was slavery in America in 1620, okay, it was slavery in America. I don't know that a person in 2025 would feel guilty about that. And even if they did, is it valuable for us as a society to know that it happened? I would say yes. History is important, that we should know all the things that happened in the past and how we got away from it. There's always the idea, and I know in the Jewish culture is never forget. I'm of the same view for the Black community. We should never forget the history we had in this country. It doesn't mean there should be a harboring of resentment and hatred with people who weren't involved, but we should know who we are and how we got to this point. As
And
far as
that's
gender, go ahead, Bob.
yeah. And that's why I say that America owes black people a debt. And I don't say white people owe black people a debt. Everybody who participated in, benefited from slavery needs to contribute to the reparation that's due. And there were black people who owned slaves. Okay, remember? That were black, and so the Oprahs of the world, the LeBron James, the Michael Jordans, all of them have to contribute to the country so that the country can repay its debt to black people. There's no two ways about it. The Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment to the Constitution clearly provide that due process and just compensation are due to everybody. And when I say everybody, I include black people. And then I do not accept the notion that we only became citizens by virtue of the act of the extension of citizenship by white folk. I think that we became citizens, that is, stakeholders in this country, the same way they did initially, when their feet hit the ground. There was no constitutional amendment that made white folks citizens. There was no constitutional amendment that declared that the country belonged to white people. Those are all cultural things that were put into place by the country under the management of a certain group of people. That management has changed over the years, and sometimes it's changed to benefit other people, and sometimes it's changed with not so much benefit for other people. The current administration benefits only the current administration, in my opinion.
So I'll say this: you and I may be of the same idea, and I don't think it's very common. I don't necessarily think laws made black people citizens of this country. The government is put in place to do the bidding of the people. Blacks in this country have always been the people. Blacks typically can trace their African Americans, I would say, can trace their heritage back further than most whites. During slavery, although they were slaves, they still were people. The government should have been for them and support them and protect them. It did not. They were here as captives, but they were no less people of this country. They no less contribute to the fabric that we call the United States. The way we speak, the way we walk, the way we talk. And I say we, I mean the U.S. as a whole is based on the influx of the black slaves. The food we eat, the cultural ideals, the music, all that. The American culture is uniquely tied to black culture in a way that people don't always understand or realize or even want to admit. So I tend to agree. I don't think a law has made black folks in this country citizens. I think the fact they've been in this country has made them citizens and made them part of the country. But that's a different conversation. But go ahead, Bob.
And it's a question of there are people who still believe those things, and who still believe that black folk are inherently inferior, and are so because the condition that can't be changed because it's by birth and not by anything else. And we still struggle. I mean, that is still an issue in this country. Now, I think for the most part, that issue has been avoided over the years by symbolism and some quote achievement, some quote progress. But as a class, the progress of black people as a class cannot be measured and should not be measured by the fact that there may be one or two or three or four individuals who've done well, who've made it. Because one thing that we have proven as a people is our resiliency. One thing we've proven as a people is that we know how to make do, and we can make do when others can't or couldn't.
So a point you made, Bob, and you made a couple